Here I'm going to be showing you how to do internal rotation liftoffs in a frog position. So just to make sure we got the setup right for the frog, we're going to start with the hands under the shoulders, knees right under the hips, and we're going to start by making sure that we widen as far as we can tolerate, getting our shins parallel to each other so our heels are in line with the knee. And then from there, you can either go or stay on your hands and sit back into the stretch, or you can go on your elbows. I'm going to do this on my elbows. So once I sit back and find a good stretch, I'm going to simply just try and lift my foot off the ground. So here I'm going into active internal rotation of the hip. So as I lift my foot up, this hip is going this direction, okay? And you'll notice that motion really occur inside the hip joint. If you notice that you're just kind of doing this, you're actually just moving from your knee, because your knee rotates. So if I just lift my heel, I'm actually creating a lot of tibial internal rotation. You don't really need to know that as much, but just know that you're trying to get your foot up towards the ceiling, not by rotating through the knee, but by rotating through the hip. And so one way to do that, if you notice my foot is parallel to the floor, as I lift up, I'm going to maintain that position. So my foot stays parallel. I don't tip it just like that. So that's how you know the rotation is happening purely from the hip joint. And these you can do for repetitions. So you can kind of just lift off and just kind of get those reps in. And the further you go into the frog stretch, the more difficult it's going to be to lift off. So you want to give yourself enough of a runway to be able to actually create motion. If you go a lot more forward, you'll get a lot more range, right? The further you sit back, the more difficult that's going to be. If you notice you're cramping because you're not accustomed to this, feel free to bring your feet together and then quickly get out of it. If it's something you can't tolerate, but your goal is to try and see if you can tolerate the cramping. It's normal. The more you do this, the better you're going to get at it. So don't be surprised if one day you're not cramping anymore, especially if you're consistent with this. Now, one thing to note when you're doing this lift off, you want to make sure that you're not rotating too much through the pelvis. So if I lift my foot, I don't want to do too much of this motion through my lower back, because then I'm not really moving through the hip in isolation. I'm getting a bunch of other stuff involved. So I really want to try and keep it only in the hip joint. But that being said, it's okay if your hip or pelvis moves just a little bit. If you want to push that effort a little, that's fine. As long as you're aware of it, you're not kind of doing this and expecting only your hip joint to move. So that's how you do internal rotation liftoffs in the frog stretch.